The fluorescent lights at Saint Margaret's flickered as I made my nightly rounds, their erratic buzzing a constant companion in the otherwise deafening silence. The abandoned hospital had been my workplace for the past 3 months, but something felt different tonight. The air was heavier, almost electric, carrying the musty scent of decay that seemed stronger than usual. My name is David Chen, and I'm, or rather was, the night security guard at Saint Margaret's Hospital. This is my account of what happened during my final week there. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know the truth. If you're reading this, please believe me. Everything I'm about to tell you is real. And if my hands shake while writing this, it's not just from the broken bones. It's from remembering what I saw in those haunted corridors. I took the job because I needed the money. Simple as that. The divorce had left me broke, and my ex-wife made sure I knew how disappointing I was every time I missed a child support payment for our daughter, Emma. When I saw the job listing, $25 an hour for night security at an abandoned hospital, it seemed like a gift. I should have known better. Nothing that seems too good to be true ever is. The hospital had been closed for 2 years following a series of mysterious patient deaths that the administration never fully explained. The official story cited budget cuts and outdated facilities, but locals whispered about darker reasons. They talked about patients going in for routine procedures and never coming out, about screams echoing from the basement in the middle of the night, about Dr. Marcus Reynolds, the chief surgeon who disappeared after the last death, leaving behind a trail of suspicious autopsy reports and patient files that made no sense. Now, the 8-story building stood as a hollow shell of its former self, its windows like dead eyes staring out at the city. The previous security guard, Tom Wilkins, had quit without notice. When I tried to contact him about the job, his wife told me he hadn't spoken a word since his last shift, and he spent his days sitting in a corner, rocking back and forth, drawing the same symbol over and over on scraps of paper. My job was simple. Patrol the floors every 2 hours, make sure no teenagers or homeless people had broken in, and report any maintenance issues to the property management company. The pay was decent, and the solitude suited me. At least it did until last Monday. I should have known something was wrong when I arrived for my shift that evening. The sunset cast long shadows through the broken windows, and they seemed to move in ways that didn't match the swaying of the trees outside. As I unlocked the main entrance, I could have sworn I heard someone whisper my name. The sound carried on the stale air that rushed out to greet me. It started with the elevator on the 3rd floor. I was doing my 2 a.m. rounds when I heard it ping. This wouldn't have been strange in a functioning hospital, but the power to the elevators had been cut off months ago. I stood there, frozen, as the display above the elevator doors flickered to life, showing numbers in descending order: 8, 7, 6. My flashlight beam trembled against the tarnished metal doors as I watched, unable to move. 5, 4, 3. The elevator stopped at my floor with another ping, and the doors slowly creaked open. The shaft was empty, completely dark, but as I stepped closer to investigate, I caught a whiff of something that made my stomach turn, the sickly sweet smell of rotting flesh mixed with antiseptic. Then I saw the bloody handprints on the inside of the elevator walls, still wet, dripping down the metal surface. I slammed my finger against the door close button repeatedly, but nothing happened. Of course not. There was no power. I backed away, my heart pounding against my ribs, and took the stairs for the rest of my shift. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation, maybe some residual power in the system or kids playing pranks. I almost convinced myself. But then came Tuesday night, and everything got worse. I was in the security office reviewing the previous shift's logs when the phone rang. Not my cell phone. The old desk phone that hadn't worked since the hospital closed. Its shrill ring pierced the silence, making me jump so violently I knocked over my coffee. For several seconds, I just stared at it, watching the red light blink with each ring. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I picked up the receiver. "Hello?" Static crackled on the line, then a voice emerged, distant and distorted, like someone speaking underwater. "Patient in room 412 needs assistance." The voice was feminine but wrong somehow, as if multiple people were speaking in unison. In the background, I could hear screaming, the kind of screams that come from someone experiencing unimaginable agony. "This is a closed facility," I managed to say, my mouth dry. "There are no patients here." "So much pain," the voice continued, ignoring me. "Why didn't you help us, doctor? Why did you let us die? We trusted you. We were awake during the procedures. We felt everything." The screaming grew louder, joined by the sound of surgical tools clattering and what might have been bone cracking. Then a new voice came on the line, a child's voice. "Daddy? Daddy, is that you?" My blood ran cold. It sounded exactly like Emma. "Why didn't you visit me in the hospital, Daddy? It hurt so much when they cut me open." I slammed the phone down, my hands shaking uncontrollably. It couldn't be Emma. She was safe at home with her mother, hundreds of miles away. This was just my guilt playing tricks on me. It had to be. Room 412. I knew I shouldn't go, but I had to check. It was my job, wasn't it? The fourth floor was darker than usual that night. My flashlight beam seemed weaker, barely penetrating the darkness that clung to the corners like tar. The ceiling tiles were stained with water damage, and chunks of them had fallen to the floor, creating obstacles I had to step around. The walls were covered in strange symbols, drawn in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. The same symbol I'd later learned Tom Wilkins had been drawing obsessively. As I walked down the corridor, I passed a mirror mounted on the wall. In its grimy surface, I caught a glimpse of someone walking behind me, a figure in a blood-stained doctor's coat. But when I spun around, the hallway was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, I saw only my own reflection. But for a split second, my face wasn't my face. It was twisted, decayed, my eyes hollow black pits, my mouth stretched in an impossible grin. Room 412 was at the end of the east wing. As I approached, I noticed the temperature dropping dramatically. My breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began forming on the walls. The door was closed, its number hanging askew on rusty screws. There were scratch marks on the wood, deep gouges that looked like they'd been made by human fingernails, and they spelled out words. "Help us," and "Still alive." I reached for the handle, and it was ice cold against my palm. The door swung open with a groan that echoed through the empty corridor. The room was exactly as it had been during my previous rounds, except for one detail. The bed wasn't empty anymore. A figure lay under the sheets, completely still. The shape was human, but something was off about the proportions. The limbs too long, the head too angular. Medical equipment surrounded the bed, and though there was no power, the monitors were on, displaying flat lines and emergency messages. The IV bag hanging beside the bed was filled with something dark and thick. "Hello?" My voice cracked. "This is security. You can't be here." The figure didn't move, but I heard a sound, wet and organic, like meat being torn apart. The sheet began to darken with spreading moisture, and a metallic smell filled the air. Then I noticed something else, shadows moving on the walls, forming shapes that looked like people writhing in pain. The shadows had faces, countless faces contorted in agony. I backed away, my flashlight beam still fixed on the bed. The figure sat up in one fluid motion, impossibly fast. The sheet fell away, and I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran as fast as I could, taking the stairs 3 at a time, not stopping until I reached the security office. I locked the door and spent the rest of the shift watching the monitors, though they showed nothing but empty corridors. But sometimes, between the static and screen tears, I caught glimpses of things moving in the halls, things that shouldn't exist. Wednesday night was quiet. Too quiet. No phones ringing, no elevators moving. Just silence so complete it felt like a physical pressure against my eardrums. But as I walked past the old operating theaters on the 6th floor, I heard humming. It was a lullaby, soft and sweet, coming from behind one of the doors. It was the same lullaby I used to sing to Emma when she was a baby. The sound drew me in despite my fear. Through the observation window, I saw a woman in an outdated nurse's uniform standing over an operating table. She was humming as she worked, her hands moving with practiced precision. There was someone on the table, hidden under surgical drapes except for one arm hanging limply over the side. The arm was gray and bloated, clearly belonging to a corpse. Medical instruments floated in the air around her, dancing like they were being conducted by an invisible orchestra. Blood dripped upward from the floor to the ceiling, defying gravity. In the corner, I saw a pile of body parts that seemed to be slowly reassembling themselves into something that was neither human nor animal. The nurse must have sensed my presence because she turned around. Her face, dear God, her face. Where features should have been, there was only smooth, blank skin, like an unfinished sculpture. But somehow I could feel her smiling at me. A mouth began to open in the blank flesh, splitting her non-face vertically, revealing rows upon rows of needle-like teeth. I stumbled backward, retching, and fled to another floor. Later, when I gathered my courage to check the operating theater again, it was empty. But on the floor I found wet footprints leading from the table to the door, as if someone, or something, had gotten up and walked away. Next to the footprints was a child's drawing done in crayon, showing a stick figure family. One figure was labeled Daddy and was drawn with X's for eyes. Standing among the other children, pale, ghostly figures in hospital gowns. But it couldn't be her. This was just another trick, another manipulation by whatever evil lived in this place. I slammed the door shut and wedged a chair under the handle. Through the door, I could hear small fists pounding, accompanied by the sound of crying that gradually turned into something else, something that no human child could produce. The walls began to bleed, and in the crimson liquid I saw faces forming. The faces of all the patients who had died here. But it was Friday night when everything came to a head. I arrived for my shift to find all the monitors in the security office showing the same image, a group of doctors performing surgery in Operating Theater 6. The footage was clear, despite the cameras having been dead for years. The patient on the table was awake, screaming silently as the doctors worked. I recognized her. She was the last patient to die before the hospital closed. As I watched, one of the doctors looked directly into the camera. His surgical mask was stained with something dark, and his eyes were completely black. He raised a scalpel to his mask in a shushing gesture, then made a slicing motion across his throat. Behind him, I could see Dr. Reynolds directing the surgery, his hands covered in blood up to the elbows. The monitors went black, then lit up again, showing a different scene. Hundreds of patients in their beds, all sitting up in perfect synchronization. Their heads turned toward the cameras, and I saw their faces were identical, all wearing the same twisted grin. Their skin was translucent, showing the decay beneath. The images began changing faster. The nurse with no face pushing a wheelchair containing a writhing mass of shadows. Children playing catch with something that looked like an organ. Doctors with too many arms performing surgery on a patient who was awake and screaming silently. Every few seconds I caught glimpses of Emma among them, looking at me accusingly. Then every monitor showed the same message in glowing green text, "Behind you." I spun around to find the room full of people. Patients, doctors, nurses, all standing perfectly still, their forms flickering like bad television reception. Some were missing limbs, others had extra ones. Their faces kept shifting, melting, reforming into new configurations of horror. Some I recognized from news reports about the hospital deaths. Others were impossible things that had never been human. At their center stood Dr. Reynolds in a blood-stained white coat. Unlike the others, he was solid, real. His face was exactly as I remembered from the news stories about the hospital's closure, except his eyes were completely white, and black fluid dripped from his smiling mouth. "We've been waiting for you, David," he said, his voice resonating with unnatural harmonics. "We need a new security guard. The last one, well, he joined our staff in a different capacity." He gestured to one of the figures behind him. Tom Wilkins, his face frozen in a scream, body twisted at impossible angles. As I watched in horror, his skin split open, revealing the writhing darkness inside. You see, this hospital never really closed. We just changed our specialty. And now it's time for your performance review. They all moved toward me at once, their bodies jerking and twitching like broken puppets. I ran, but every corridor I turned down was filled with more of them. They herded me up, floor by floor, until I reached the roof. Behind me, I could hear them singing that lullaby, Emma's lullaby. Standing at the edge, looking down at the street 8 stories below, I had a choice to make. Behind me, the door burst open and they poured out onto the roof. Doctors, nurses, patients, all reaching for me with hungry hands. The children were among them, their eyes glowing in the darkness. Dr. Reynolds stepped forward holding a scalpel. "Don't worry," he said, his smile stretching wider than any human mouth could. "This won't hurt, for long, and you'll get to stay with us forever. Just like Tom, just like all the others." I chose to jump. By some miracle, I survived the fall. Multiple broken bones, internal injuries, but I survived. The paramedics found me on the sidewalk outside Saint Margaret's just before dawn. None of them would look directly at the building while they worked on me. One of them quit his job that day. I'm writing this from my hospital bed. A different hospital, thank God. The police searched Saint Margaret's after I gave my statement, but they found nothing unusual. Of course they didn't. Those things only come out at night. I've heard they're hiring a new security guard for the night shift. The pay is good, they say. The job is easy. If you're considering applying, take my advice. Don't. Some buildings are empty for a reason. Some places should stay abandoned. And if you ever find yourself near St. Margaret's Hospital at night and you hear an elevator ping or a phone ring or children laughing, run. Run as fast as you can and don't look back. Don't look at the windows where faces might be watching. Don't listen for that lullaby. And whatever you do, don't answer if you hear a child calling for their parent, because they're always looking for new staff members and they're always accepting new patients. I thought that would be the end of my story, but I was wrong. The horror didn't stop when I left St. Margaret's. It followed me home. Last night, my ex-wife called. She was hysterical, screaming that Emma hadn't come home from school. They found her backpack outside St. Margaret's Hospital. The security cameras, the real ones from buildings across the street, showed her walking in through the front doors at sunset, following what looked like a doctor in a white coat. I'm checking myself out of the hospital tonight. My bones haven't healed, and walking is agony. But I have to go back. I have to find her. I know she's not really there. My rational mind knows she's safe at home hundreds of miles away, but I also know what I heard in those halls. What I saw. Dr. Reynolds is waiting for me. He's been visiting me in my dreams, showing me things. Terrible things. He says Emma is just the beginning. Says the hospital is hungry again, and this time it won't be satisfied with just a few patients. So if you're reading this, please understand why I have to go back. And if I don't make it out this time, if you hear about more disappearances at St. Margaret's, burn it down. Burn it all down. Salt the earth where it stood. Because the dead in St. Margaret's aren't really dead. And they're spreading. The end.